In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Adorable Will. I want to pray these titles, but I am unable to do it. Come and do it with me, and I'll do everything well. Jesus and Mary, I honor you and I cherish you, one with Luisa, in whom the divine will has its field and carries out its life. Luisa, little daughter of Jesus' will. Luisa, the first and depository of a good so great. Luisa, to whom the divine will was entrusted. Luisa, who was chosen with a special mission. Luisa, the origin of the kingdom of Jesus' Fiat. Luisa, in whom the divine Fiat encloses everyone and everything, all past and future centuries. Luisa, in whom everything the supreme volition has done in creation casts its seed into her. Luisa, from whom the supreme volition receives the satisfactions and the requital for all of its acts that creatures owe it. Luisa, in each hour of her life the supreme volition encloses centuries. Luisa, who has her original act in Jesus' will reigning. Luisa, who has the origin of the supreme will and is able to carry out its divine life. Luisa, who Jesus elevates to the original state of the creation of man. Luisa, creature who can give Jesus anything and everything. Luisa, one who possesses the unity of the divine volition and is free to act and do as much good as she wants. Luisa, who has the source of good within herself and at her disposal. Luisa, who feels within herself the continuous touches of her Creator. Luisa, who feels the waves of the Creator's paternal love. Luisa, who feels her own little sea flow within her soul from the immense sea of He who created her. Luisa, one who possesses Jesus' unity and good converts into her own nature. Luisa, who finds the source of good within herself. Luisa, creature who lives on the paternal knees. Luisa, creature all attentive on hearing the echo of the triune God's word. Luisa, creature all attentive on hearing the echo of the triune God's works. Luisa, creature all attentive on hearing the echo of the triune God's steps. Luisa, creature all attentive on hearing the echo of the triune God's love. Luisa, creature who is the repeater of the acts of her Creator. Luisa, the soul who Jesus binds with chains of light. Luisa, the soul who emits many harmonious and beautiful voices, like silvery sounds in her acts, that wound the hearing of all of heaven, and make known that the divine will is operating in her. Luisa, of whom Jesus acts as with a second mother of his, recalling and depositing in her all the acts done together with the Virgin. Luisa, daughter who is little and who becomes littler. Jesus and Mary, I cherish you and I love you, one with Luisa, little child. Luisa, poor little one. Luisa, who has made many sacrifices. Luisa, to whom Jesus manifested the truth of his divine will. Luisa, in whom Jesus centralized the first steps of the divine will into the midst of creatures by its knowledges. Luisa, in whose soul the knowledges of the divine will form a sea of light. Luisa, whose work of composing the story of the divine will is extremely long. Luisa, narrator and bearer of the story of an eternal will. Luisa, one who offers royal acts to the eternal majesty. Luisa, who rises into the sphere of the Son of the eternal Fiat. Luisa, who becomes of all and gives herself to all. Luisa, the repeater of her Creator. Luisa, in whom the divine will formed its first acts of life. Luisa, Jesus' little daughter of his will, who gives Jesus love in all things and everywhere. Luisa, in whom Jesus made the deposit of his acts in the divine will. Luisa, the soul in whom the maternal echo resounds. Luisa, who pearls all creation with the enchantment of her I love you. Luisa, the soul who has the bond of union with all created things. Luisa, whose acts are fused in all created things. Luisa, one who lives in the divine will and absolutely cannot go to purgatory. Luisa, the divine Fiat's little daughter, chosen, kept sacrificed, and trusted for the knowledges, the truths, and the secret hidden sorrows of the divine Fiat. Luisa, the soul in whom the divinity sowed the seed of divine daughtership. Luisa, chosen in a way all special for the kingdom of the divine will. Luisa, chosen as Jesus' little secretary. Luisa, who Jesus pours his heart out to and entrusts to her his secrets, joys, hidden sorrows, surprising truths. Luisa, one who enters into the divine order. Luisa, one who lives in the divine will, where pain cannot enter her soul. Luisa, one who is in possession of Jesus. Luisa, the soul who has everything in her power. Luisa, creature who repeats the love and prayers of the Queen of Heaven. Luisa, creature who repeats the virtues of the saints. Luisa, in whom the celestial inhabitants echo resounds. Luisa, whose echo resounds in heaven. Luisa, in whom Jesus feels himself present on earth. Luisa, who repeats Jesus' acts. Luisa, in whom Jesus becomes actor and spectator. Luisa, bearer of divine joys for the whole of heaven. Luisa, creature who keeps heaven opened and makes the celestial dew of graces, light, love descend upon earth over all creatures. Jesus and Mary, I love you and glory to my Creator, one with Luisa, with whom the divine will poured out its sorrow. Luisa, one who with invincible strength forces the doors of divine will to open wide, and with her sweet chains of love makes it come to reign in the midst of creatures. Luisa, one who like a bride bejewels the groom with her loving chains, carrying him in triumph into the midst of creatures. Luisa, one who forms the dawn to make rise the sun of the Fiat voluntas tua, on earth as it is in heaven. Luisa, to whom the divine Fiat opened its doors. Luisa, who the divine fiat made share in its knowledges. Luisa, who gathers the fierce divine army for God's glory, that asks with insistence and violence for the kingdom of the divine will. Luisa, who goes around in creation and places the divine fiat as noble and divine flag in front of each created thing. Luisa, Jesus' little daughter. Luisa, who heaven and earth are astonished to watch the braveness of her request for the kingdom to come. Luisa, who moves all to ask for the coming of the kingdom of Jesus' divine will upon earth. Luisa, at the head of entire peoples to whom a mission so great has been entrusted. Luisa, who forms the entire peoples by making all the knowledges about the divine fiat known. Luisa, who forms the entire peoples by going around everywhere, moving heaven and earth for the kingdom of Jesus' will. Luisa, one who encloses what is great and what is good. Luisa, true sun that produces various tints of beauty, sweetness, goodness, of multiple effects. Luisa, daughter whose I love you is the continuity of the first I love you said in the divine will. Luisa, one who forms an endless generation for her Creator. Luisa, the soul who acquires a long offspring. Luisa, the soul who forms the long generation of her children in the mind of her celestial Father. Luisa, the soul who forms the long generation of the children of her Word. Luisa, the soul who forms the long generation of the children of her works, steps, and heartbeats. Luisa, the soul who is the populator and the fecund mother that keeps her Creator always in feast. Luisa, beautiful newborn of Jesus' will. Luisa, who emits her acts on behalf of all for the great purchase of the kingdom of the divine will. Luisa, one who possesses the divine will and can take everything and give Jesus everything. Luisa, whose littleness carries and embraces immensity. Luisa, whose weakness carries strength. Luisa, whose nothingness possesses the all, the creature, the Creator. Luisa, in whose little arms the infinite, the eternal, lets himself be carried as though in triumph. Luisa, who embraces everything and has the divine will's immensity and its eternal rest. Luisa, Jesus' little daughter, who gives him dominion over everything. Luisa, one who calls the sea of happiness, of the divine will, into herself. Luisa, one who removes from the triune God the sight of the unhappiness in poor creatures, making them twice as happy. Luisa, daughter of Jesus' divine will. Luisa, one who is enraptured by divine will and becomes light. Luisa, most fortunate one in heaven and on earth. Luisa, the most loved by God. Jesus and Mary, I glorify you and I praise you. One with Luisa, one who receives everything and gives everything. Luisa, whose human will, with Jesus's and the celestial mother's, was needed for the kingdom of the divine will to come. Luisa, who kept her human will sacrificed. Luisa, little daughter of the divine will. Luisa, the little daughter of the divine will, who is celebrated by all. Luisa, the little daughter of the divine will, who is the feast of all. Luisa, the daughter, the newborn of the divine Fiat, who the sovereign Mama celebrates. Luisa, the soul in whom the divine will is present, and who is the luminous point in the world. Luisa, the luminous point in the world where another sun more beautiful, more refulgent, can be seen. Luisa, the luminous point where the current of evil is stopped. Luisa, luminous point that is the smile of the earth. Luisa, luminous point, whose light is herald and bearer of peace. Luisa, whose light is herald and bearer of beauty. Luisa, whose light is herald and bearer of sanctity. Luisa, luminous point, whose light is herald and bearer of life that never dies. Luisa, fortunate point of the earth in whose midst light never dims and life always rises. Luisa, the soul who is true queen that dominates everything. Luisa, the soul who gives peace to all. Luisa, the soul who does good to all. Luisa, the soul who is well liked by all. Luisa, for whom Jesus created everything. Luisa, who Jesus gave everything. Luisa, the triune God's little daughter. Luisa, who the divine will loves so much. Luisa, who Jesus blessed in soul and body, confirming God's likeness in her. Luisa, the bilocator of the divine life within the endless sea of Jesus' eternal volition. Luisa, the populator of the divine life within the endless sea of Jesus' eternal volition. Luisa, called to live in Jesus' will. Luisa, fortunate creature. Luisa, one who rises back into the act of Adam, innocent, and makes his act her own. Luisa, one who rises back into the acts of the Queen of Heaven and her Creator, centralizing herself in them. Luisa, everything is hers, and she gives everything to God. Luisa, who gives God to God. Luisa, in whom the divine will places its divine order. Luisa, who does nothing but follow the order and works of her Creator. Luisa, one whose life is precious and striking to Jesus. Luisa, one whose life is of a beauty so rare it is impossible to find one similar to her. Luisa, one whose tints of beauty enrapture the Supreme Being, forming the most beautiful scenes for their divine gaze. Jesus and Mary, I praise you and I thank you, one with Luisa, the veil of the divine will. Luisa, the most fortunate creature, who calls the attention of her God to make feast for him. Luisa, who possesses everything and brings God everything. Luisa, who the Supreme Being called to live in the divine will. Luisa, the little daughter of the Supreme Being's divine will. Luisa, the little newborn. Luisa, Jesus' little daughter. Luisa, the little daughter of Jesus' will, who never left him alone. Luisa, the newborn of Jesus' Fiat. Luisa, daughter who the divine will loves, and more than a mother, it holds her in its arms. Luisa, daughter who the divine will holds in its bosom, growing inside together with her. Luisa, daughter in whose heart the divine will palpitates. Luisa, daughter in whose blood the divine will circulates. Luisa, daughter in whose feet the divine will walks. Luisa, daughter in whose mind the divine will thinks. Luisa, daughter in whose voice the divine will speaks. Luisa, little daughter of Jesus' will. Luisa, who the divine will expands so much as to extend her in all of its works. Luisa, who is reborn and wants to be only the divine will's daughter. Luisa, the divine will's daughter. Luisa, one who runs together with the whirling, orderly, and harmonious race of the whole creation. Luisa, one who runs with creation, forming her note of harmony that echoes in the celestial fatherland, drawing the attention of all the blessed. Luisa, little daughter of the divine Fiat. Luisa, the soul who unleashes her lightnings from the womb of her humanity, forming more light in the sun of the divine Fiat. Luisa, the soul who operates in the divine will, who lights up the earth from the darkness of the human volition. Luisa, who with the celestial queen Jesus calls my two mamas. Luisa, the little daughter of Jesus' will. Luisa, to whom Jesus gives the gift of divine life, to multiply it and give it to whomever she wants. Luisa, to whom Jesus gives his very life. Luisa, the soul who gives the triune God the occasion to make their sea rise, giving them the field to flood earth and heaven. Luisa, creature who calls back the feasts, the amusements, the games of the beginning of creation with her Creator. Luisa, one who wants nothing but God's will and his echo that resounds in her. Luisa, one who lets herself be carried by God's divine echo. Luisa, one who is kept by the triune God as their own thing, exclusively theirs and inseparable from them. Luisa, the soul invested with all of the triune God's divine qualities. Luisa, the creature where there is divine life, because the light of the divine fiat dominates. Luisa, daughter whose sufferings are present before God, an imperative act to obtain that creatures dispose themselves to the divine will, and that God concede a good so great. Luisa, daughter whose writings, night vigils, pains, sacrifices, sufferings, prayers, rounds, will shine like rays of the sun, like diamonds and precious stones of infinite value. Jesus and Mary, I thank you and I esteem you, one with Luisa, to whom the mission to make known the kingdom of the divine will was entrusted. Luisa, who, when in heaven, Jesus will place in communication with the souls who will live in the kingdom of his fiat on earth. Luisa, whose life and everything she did and suffered will be in the midst of the souls who will live in the divine will, and everything they do will have its origin in her. Luisa, the one who recognizes the triune God's works. Luisa, who the triune God gives the freedom to establish many bonds between heaven and earth. Luisa, who the triune God gives the freedom to open many doors of communication. Luisa, who the triune God gives the freedom to place many chains to make her acts ascend into heaven and make many graces descend for the good of all creatures. Luisa, daughter of Jesus' supreme volition. Luisa, for whom the divine will makes itself revealer of what it has done for love of the creature. Luisa, the little newborn of Jesus' adorable will. Luisa, little daughter of the divine will, who is rich, beautiful and ruling in the midst of triune God's works. Luisa, little daughter of the divine will, for whom the triune God created everything. Luisa, one who lives of light. Luisa, who prays for all, and in the name of all, for each thought, word, and act, forms the right in the divine paternity, that all may receive the kingdom of the divine fiat, and the dispositions to be able to possess it. Luisa, the soul who forms her own light within the divine will. Luisa, daughter who Jesus gave great graces to, and gave great graces through her to the whole world. Luisa, living lamp. Luisa, Jesus' prisoner. Luisa, a sun burning before Jesus. Luisa, prisoner constantly near Jesus, under his sacramental gazes. Luisa, one who the chains of the divine will alone keeps imprisoned. Luisa, who Jesus kept imprisoned for 40 years. Luisa, prisoner in whom Jesus placed all the capital of the kingdom of his will. Luisa, whose long imprisonment has been the weapon to fight her Creator, to have her manifest his kingdom. Luisa, daughter who Jesus blesses with his whole heart. Luisa, daughter in whom Jesus blesses his very will. Luisa, daughter whose thoughts, breaths, and heartbeats Jesus blesses. Luisa, daughter who, for love of her, Jesus blesses all human wills, so they may dispose themselves to receive the life of his eternal volition. Luisa, dearest daughter of Jesus. Luisa, the little daughter of Jesus' will. Luisa, she who possesses the origin, the life of the divine Fiat, that will bring about the beginning, the origin of the kingdom of the divine will. Luisa, in whom Jesus pours the beneficial dew of the light of the divine volition. Luisa, Jesus' little prisoner, daughter invested and bound by the sweet chains of his will. Luisa, in whom Jesus makes the life of his divine will grow. Luisa, in whose kisses Jesus feels the kisses of his very volition. Luisa, the soul in whom everything is divine. Luisa, a veil that hides Jesus. Luisa, a living host. Jesus and Mary, I esteem you and I honor you, one with Luisa, a living tabernacle. Luisa, who echoes Jesus' prayer, putting all his acts and all created things in motion. Luisa, whose echo is one with Jesus' echo. Luisa, sacrificed like Jesus for a cause so holy. Luisa, whose company is sweet to Jesus and renders him happy. Luisa, who makes arise all the acts of Jesus' celestial Mama. Luisa, who makes arise and puts in the field the works of her Creator. Luisa, one who can sit at the divine table. Luisa, one who can open all God's treasures. Luisa, one who can enter into the sacrarium of the most intimate secrets of the divine hiding places, and as the owner, take them and give them back to her Creator. Luisa, one who puts things in motion, making them arise and places all the divine works in attitude. Luisa, one who is the renewer of all joys and happinesses for her Creator. Luisa, one who puts all her Creator's love in motion, and making it rise again, she forms an enchanting scene all of love for her Creator. Luisa, one who enters into the royal palace of her celestial Father, putting the many varied beauties into motion. Luisa, fortunate creature in the triune God's royal palace of their divine volition. Luisa, dearest daughter, who renews for the triune God the joys of creation, that of the sovereign Queen, and that of redemption. Luisa, in whom Jesus consummated everything. Luisa, into whom the divine will makes the whole divine army enter. Luisa, who all of God's acts are enclosed in. Luisa, in whose soul Jesus formed this first kingdom to his divine will. Luisa, in whose soul Jesus enclosed everything he did in redemption, what the sovereign Queen did, and what all the saints have done and do. Luisa, in whom the many lights, luminous rays of divine truths are fixed. Luisa, in whom the light of the truths form a most beautiful ornament. Luisa, who has the right over the divine properties. Luisa, who has been endowed with a great dowry by God with these truths. Luisa, who all of heaven is amazed at seeing so many lights in her, all pregnant with many divine lives.
You have reached the end of day 22 of the titles of Luisa. Fiat.